In this lesson, we'll start to set up some controls for the lightning bolt that we built in our previous lesson. Alright, so we have our lightning bolt that we've already built. So what we want to do now is start to set up some additional controls that will allow this to basically have either end of this lightning bolt connected to the pods themselves, or to the engines themselves. So one of the issues though that we have at the moment is that this lightning bolt effect, or the noise that's generating this lightning bolt effect, is affecting some areas that we may not necessarily want them to. You'll notice that the ends of this curve are being distorted pretty heavily by this noise modifier, which is going to make it really difficult to actually make it appear as though the lightning is coming from this particular point on the engine. So let's basically tell this modifier not to affect every single thing. So that will basically now start to leave these ends of the curve static. So let me start by going into my top view, and just to make this a little bit easier to see, I'm just going to select my curve and press Alt-Q on my keyboard to enter my isolation mode. So the process of basically just defining a set of components for our modifiers to affect is really pretty easy. What we need to do is just go back to our line itself. We'll go in and to the segments, and essentially now just select the segments that we want this noise modifier to affect. So let's say we want to leave, let's say 3 vertices on either side of this curve. So again, with my segments active, let's come in and now just grab this from here to here, essentially now just leaving 3 vertices on either side. Now all we have to do is, with that selection made, go back up to our noise modifier, and now you'll see that my noise is only affecting those segments that I had selected. Alright, so very nice. That's going to make it now much easier to actually lock those ends of the curves to these points on the engines. Now, in order to take this curve and lock it to these points in the engine, we're going to actually use some binding techniques and actually link these to a couple of helper objects. So let's go back to our Create menu. Let's go into the helpers, and with this active, let's go to Point to add a couple of point helpers in here. So we'll add one on this end of the curve and one over here. Alright, now with that done, I'll go ahead and just right click. And now let's select this curve. Let's go back into our modifiers, and we'll use a skin modifier to connect it to these 2 helpers. Again, might be a little bit easier if I were to come in and just grab the helpers and the curve itself and press Alt-Q on my keyboard just so we can see these without any kind of interference from anything else. So let's select our curve, pull this down, and let's now drop in the skin modifier. Okay, so the first thing it's going to do is we need to now define what the objects are that are going to act as our bones or our controllers. So let's go to the skin modifier, let's go to Add Bones, and it'll allow us to pick these 2 points. Alright, now this is the only thing that I have listed currently, because right now these are the only things that are visible in my scene. If you were not using the isolate mode, you might see a lot of other things listed in here. So with our 2 points selected, we'll press Select. And now if we were to grab one of these helpers and try to move these, you can now start to see they are having a little bit of an effect on the curve. Now we come across a couple of issues that you can see here. Number one is the fact that these helpers are not really smoothly transitioning into each other, so we wind up with this definite break in the middle of our lightning bolt. The second option is you can see that these helpers are actually not affecting the entire curve. If you remember from just a moment ago when we had made our selection, we had told the modifiers not to affect basically the ends of these curves. Now, unfortunately, that feeds up to the skin modifier as well, so what we need to do is tell the skin modifier to use a completely different selection of components than what our noise modifier is using. So to do this, I'm going to select my noise modifier, and with this point in my stack selected, let's add in a new spline selection. Alright, so now you can see that there is a spline select between my noise and my skin. So now go into spline select. I'll just select all of my splines, and now go up to my skin modifier. And now what we should see is that the skin modifier is affecting everything. So, like I said, we're now essentially using two completely different sets of selections. So my noise modifier is using my selected segments, where my skin modifier is now using the selected splines. So really, really nice features to be able to have access to in 3ds Max. Now let's come in and start to clear away some of these kind of breaks that we have right in the middle of our electric bolt. Let's try to blend these together a little bit better. So let's go in, we'll select this curve. Let's open up the skin modifier and select envelope. Now once we do that and select one of these 2 points, you should start to see this new gizmo that appears around our helper itself. So what we can start to do now is, with our envelope option enabled and one of our points selected, let's start to go in now and begin modifying some of these envelope properties. So by default we have a fall off slow, which gives us a little bit different type of transition between these weights. What I find works really well for this particular situation is more of a straight fall off. So that way we get really no curvature as far as the fall off is concerned. It should make just more of a straight line for the weighting. Now I'll also go into a relative mode, which allows us to start to blend things together a little bit better. So again, just clicking from an A, which is absolute, to R, which is relative. And now, if we want to start blending this together, I'm going to select basically just the outer portion of this gizmo. Let's actually grab this opposite side. And now, just simply start to expand this and blending this together a little bit better. Now we start to see a little bit of a snag that appears right down here, and that's completely normal. We'll fix that here in just a moment. Now, let's go back, and again with the envelope active, let's select point 2 and do the same thing. We'll switch this to basically just a straight fall off. We'll switch this from absolute to relative, which will give us a little bit cleaner fall off. And again, grab just the outer portion of this gizmo, scale this out, and start to blend that together. And you'll notice that basically what we were seeing before was just kind of a weighting issue between these 2 points. Once we start to expand this out and blend these together, you notice that becomes much, much cleaner. Alright, so now that we have this set up, you can start to see now our different ends of the curve are now weighted to these 2 different helper objects. Now, before we actually move any further, one thing that we probably need to test is to see how well this is actually going to work, because keep in mind that this is something that is going to have to be animated on a motion path. So it's going to be a good idea to try pulling this and see if when these 2 helpers start to travel a great distance, if we don't wind up with any errors. And in my case, you can start to see a couple of issues. You can start to see some pretty heavy distortion in my curve. So this is pretty easy to fix. Let's again select the curve, go to the envelope, select the point that we want to adjust. In this case, it looks like it's going to be 0.1, and you can see that this little jagged edge is actually being caused by the point at which the weights from this end completely stop. So let's just come in. We'll again grab that modifier, expand that so that it covers everything, and we'll start to eliminate that little hook that we had previously. Now let's also double check this other point. So again, grab the outer portion of this gizmo, expand that out, and it looks like everything should be fine. Okay. So now that we have this set up, let's exit our isolation mode, and we should be able to take these 2 helpers back to where they were. There we are. And we'll just zoom in to these, position these back at either side of the engine. Alright, and there we go. So what we'll start to do now in our next lesson is basically just finish out this lightning bolt by connecting it to the different sides of the engine, and then we'll actually start to control some of the rendering parameters of this curve.